Hello, anyone who's here already, just saying hello and letting you know we'll be waiting a couple of minutes to let people into the room and getting started just about 7. So hang with us for a couple of minutes. We'll say this again once we get started, but you're welcome to ask questions via the Q&A feature, and then we'll take those and field them either during the talk or at the end as works best. But ask questions at any time by that means. Well, it's 7 o'clock now. We'll kind of start a little slowly to let stragglers come in. But hello, I'm Philip Johnson. I'm Executive Director of the Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition, your host tonight. Lurking behind the scenes will be Katie Russell, our communications coordinator, and she'll field the questions later on. And we're, for those who don't know us, very briefly, Oregon Shores, which is more than 50 years old now, is a comprehensive coastal conservation group, which is to say we work on issues from Brookings to Astoria and from the crest of the coastal mountains to the edge of the continental shelf. We work on a wide range of things from land use planning and water quality to endangered species to shoreline management and marine conservation. We're often best known by our volunteer program, Coast Watch, through which people adopt 1-mile segments of the Oregon coast and report on problems that come up and track changes, both natural and human caused. We always welcome volunteers. We always welcome members, and we always welcome people to bring issues to us. You can learn more about our work on our website, oregonshores.org. And let me mention, by the way, that as I'm the executive director as of now, but we are going through a major transition right at the beginning of the year. I will be moving into a new role we're calling conservation director, where I will spend more time focusing on issues such as protecting eelgrass. And we'll be announcing a new executive director quite soon, so watch for that. Another transition is also happening, one that isn't quite so happy for us. This is our last appearance of Anu Sawkar, our speaker tonight, who we have worked with intensively for the last 4 years. I'll try and hold back my tears, but we're definitely sorry to see her go. An attorney-client relationship sounds like, well, once in a while you go into a conference session, but the attorney actually handles all the legal stuff. This isn't like that. This is a partnership where we have been, in constant touch with each other for the last 4 years. Anu helps with everything from broad questions of strategy to just checking my copy for the newsletter so my rants don't cross any legal boundaries. Anu is a Portland, not quite a native, but grew up here in Portland, and left us to get her JD, her law degree at Cornell Law School, and returned to start with the Crag Law Center 4 years ago, and immediately ran into a tremendous baptism of fire as we got into the thick of the battle to block the Jordan Cove LNG plant proposal for North Spit, and worked intensively on that. She's worked with us in many other issues, and most recently has been guiding our efforts to work on the growing round of planning efforts for the state's estuaries, which she'll be talking about tonight. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce Anu Sawkar.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Philip. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is eelgrass. I'm sharing my screen right now. As Philip said, my name is Anu. I'm an associate attorney at Crag Law Center. A little bit about Crag. Crag is a nonprofit environmental law center that works with communities across the Pacific Northwest to protect our environment and our climate. We provide our services for free or as close to free as possible. Crag is client focused and our mission is legal aid for the environment. As Philip mentioned, I started my role here at Crag in January 2019, and a large part of that has been working with Oregon Shores, part of the Coastal Law Project partnership. As I'm wrapping up my time here at Crag, I wanted to start tonight by saying that this work has really been a pleasure and an honor. It is so meaningful, and as I'm hoping you will learn today, just more important than ever to protect areas like estuaries and important habitats like eelgrass. So eelgrass, and this is more than just my opinion, is one of the most important species in the ocean. And the second edition of Oregon Shores' primer for protecting eelgrass is going to focus specifically on eelgrass in Yaquina Bay. And basis for this, or the reason we're doing this, is to explain how people can best get involved in the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan update to protect eelgrass. The revised working primer has come out of the generous support from Spirit Mountain Community Fund, and it will be out in a couple of days on Oregon Shores' website, so keep a lookout for that. This is eelgrass in Yaquina Bay. And as Philip mentioned, we have been working since 2019 now, specifically to protect eelgrass. Outline for the presentation today. I'm going to start with a very simple introduction to eelgrass and why it matters. I am not a scientist, so this is not going to be an in-depth course on eelgrass. It's really just Eelgrass 101. It's just going to be enough for us to understand how to protect it when we are navigating these EMP update processes, because the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan update is really the pilot process for estuaries up and down the Oregon coast. One really great resource I recommend to learn more about eelgrass in Yaquina Bay is an excellent presentation by Jim Caldy titled "The Past, Present, and Future Seagrasses in Yaquina Bay and Other Estuaries." I am actually going to drop this into the chat box. It is well worth your time to take a look at it. Let's see if I can actually find the chat box to drop it in. Well, I can't right now, but I will do that at the very end, and hopefully y'all can still see my screen. Still see my screen? Okay. Once we talk about what eelgrass is and why it matters, I want to give everyone a very simple overview of why eelgrass is at risk. It is disappearing at an alarming rate in Coos Bay and Yaquina Bay. And better protecting eelgrass means that we have a better understanding of what threats we need to address with the legal management frameworks for this species. And two of the biggest threats we'll be focusing on today, addressing today, are the lack of public awareness of the importance of this species. And what I argue is inadequate protection of eelgrass under existing management frameworks. These frameworks need to do better at addressing multiple stressor impacts like climate change and coastal development. These are just together really degrading our eelgrass beds. And really, improving our legal framework starts with our estuary management plan updates. The Yaquina Bay EMP update is going to be the public's first formal opportunity in a long time to speak up for Oregon's eelgrass. So we're going to learn about EMPs, and then we're going to spend most of the rest of this discussion learning how to navigate that process and how to effectively comment and advocate for strong protections in the updated Yaquina Bay EMP. So let's get started. What is eelgrass? Eelgrass is simply, eelgrass is a seagrass. And that means it's a marine flowering plant that completes its whole life cycle, including pollination and photosynthesis underwater in estuaries. I learned just recently that it can grow to over 6 feet tall, which is pretty cool. Eelgrass likes to live in the lower intertidal, upper subtidal zone, so it's only exposed by the lowest of tides. And eelgrass really loves cold water, specifically estuarine waters that are between 50 to 60 degrees. For reference, that happens to be the average temperature in Yaquina Bay. And when I say it loves cold water, that is the ideal temperature for it to conduct photosynthesis and breathe. A couple other things to know about eelgrass. Eelgrass is a dynamic species, meaning its presence varies by season and by year. And that really impacts what kind of data is suitable to craft effective policy to protect it. A change in eelgrass extent from one year to another does not necessarily indicate eelgrass loss or gain. So if we are relying on a piece of static data, so current observed extent data of eelgrass, to understand how to protect eelgrass and its suitable habitat, places where it could grow, even if it's not there at this moment, we're not making effective decisions. It's important to monitor eelgrass and document it at its highest rate of abundance in a year. So that means like having a consistent method, and it's important to rely on maximum observed extent data as well as current known extent data to understand where it's living currently and where it might like to live, where it might show up again. Another piece to know about eelgrass: it is tricky to restore. It needs, well, essentially, you have to have the right site, the right plants, and the right conditions for eelgrass to thrive. So it's a very specific mix of temperature, light, salinity, and nutrients. If any one of those conditions is not happening quite right at the right time, it's not going to work. And that just means that effective eelgrass protections must prioritize avoidance of impacts in the first place, rather than rely on mitigating impacts that might come from a particular development proposal. Why is eelgrass important? So that is something I could speak about. I could probably spend this whole hour talking about how cool eelgrass is. The Primor is going to go into a lot more detail there. But this graphic tells us a lot of what we need to know about it, a lot of why it's worth protecting. So it nurtures fish and wildlife. And that includes culturally significant first foods such as salmon and oysters. It protects estuarine water quality. It bolsters up shorelines, so it can protect coastal communities from extreme storm events. It mitigates climate change. It is a blue carbon habitat. It sequesters harmful greenhouse gases, and it supports strong coastal economies. It is nursery habitat for a lot of different types of fish and shellfish that are commercially and recreationally important. So despite being one of the most important species in the ocean, it's at risk. Eelgrass faces many threats related to human activity and changing conditions, ocean conditions. And again, those are going to be ready for you to learn more about in detail in the primer. What's really important to know today is that it is seriously facing decline wherever we're monitoring it in Oregon's estuaries. Again, Jim Caldy's presentations or his preliminary observations show that 50 to 70% of Yaquina Bay's eelgrass is gone. In Oregon's case, or in Yaquina Bay's case, that does not appear to be the result of wasting disease, which is a marine slime mold that wreaked havoc on eelgrass or Zostera marina on the Atlantic coast. And it doesn't really seem to be the result of avian overgrazing. Where Jim Caldy's research is showing more of a potential threat here in Oregon is with warming ocean waters and episodic warming events like the marine blob that we saw a few years ago. Science is now showing that that might be a significant contributor to eelgrass decline. As the water warms, and I won't go into depth on this really awesome graphic, but as just important to know, as the water warms, eelgrass respiration becomes more labored, and it's harder for it to be productive, and it'll eventually die. When you combine this temperature threat with lack of information on where eelgrass is based on maximum observed extent, and a lack of effective consideration of multiple stressors, for instance, docks that limit light, upland development that might have runoff, and just cumulative impacts in rule making and permit review, you're really looking at a crisis for this important vegetation. It's too much pressure. So while we can't immediately stop global warming, so this is my little formula here, temperature stressors, reliance on limited and static location and extent data, plus the failure of the law to adequately address multiple stressor impacts equals pressure on eelgrass. So yes, while we can't immediately stop global warming, the estuary management plan updates are going to be our first chance in a while to let decision makers know that they need to do a better job of managing coastal development threats, so eelgrass beds are not overwhelmed. So what are estuary management plans? Estuary management plans are the local implementation of Oregon statewide planning goal 16, which governs estuarine resources. Goal 16, of course, is one of several different state and federal authorities with jurisdiction over estuaries and eelgrass. One important thing to note here is that it is part of Oregon's federal consistency review program as an enforceable policy. So any revisions adopted to local estuary management plan updates will become applicable to certain federal actions in the coastal zone. So in that way, strong eelgrass protections at the local land use level in this revised plan will have kind of a trickle up effect. Goal 16 specifically is it's a spatial management plan. It requires setting policies to protect estuaries based on resource inventories of important habitats, and that includes eelgrass. The inventory data is used to establish management units, which are discrete little geographical areas, which then in turn direct which uses are allowed and which uses must be limited. And our classifications are natural, conservation, and development units. Natural units are the strongest protections. So why are we updating our estuary management plans? Simple answer is they're old and they're obsolete. Our estuary management plans do not reflect current conditions. They do not address climate change or account for climate change impacts. Original adoption processes did not seek government to government process or engagement with tribal sovereigns. The plans do not, in many cases, recognize changes in the law, such as listed species under the Endangered Species Act that have happened since adoption. So we have a lot of opportunities here to improve just general estuarine habitat protections in addition to eelgrass protections. So the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan. The Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan is being used as a pilot project by the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development to serve as a guide for updating the rest of the estuaries up and down the Oregon coasts. Currently, or the existing Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan, like several other plans up and down the coast, has not been updated since it was originally adopted by Lincoln County in 1982. The existing Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan, and it's important to note, does not include its adopted resource inventory documents or map documents, which serve as the basis for its currently adopted estuary management plan policies. So a very simple suggestion for an update is making sure that all of those documents are digitized, updated, and included in the new plan in a high quality format. So just a little bit about the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan update. It will include revising the resource inventory that serves as the basis for policies in the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan. So it's important to think through what kind of eelgrass data would be best included in that resource inventory update to inform stronger policy protections in the plan itself. The update will assess and possibly revise each of the 10 parts included in the current YBMP. And of course, this means overall policies and site-specific management policies in the estuary management units. And community engagement right now is scheduled to begin in January 2023. This is obviously subject to change based off of what the project team is kind of working on and what's on the plate of local governments. But that's the plan for right now. In either case, it's important to be prepared, speak up and speak out for eelgrass. So I want to use the rest of our presentation to think through how we can address the need for stronger eelgrass protections through looking at one particular part of the 1982 Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan. And that's Plan Part 2, Overall Management Policies. You'll see on your screen here, overall management policies in the 1982 Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan. This is just one simple page. They essentially mirror the language of 2 of Goal 16's implementation requirements, and they have bay-wide application, which means that they apply not only to just Yaquina Bay, they apply to any other estuary in the management plan, and they address things like estuary alterations, dredge and fill, and set a priority of use. You can also see that overall management policies 2 and 3 are somewhat aspirational. They kind of look at plan needs related to recreation and set an intention with respect to those. When you're thinking about commenting on a potential rulemaking, it's helpful to consider what sort of options you might see in terms of like a revised or amended plan. And so in this case, one thing we know we will likely see is an assessment of whether these policies as written are consistent with Goal 16 as amended, right? And that's going to be in particular with respect to overall management policy 4 and 5. I set up this little hierarchy because it's important to kind of see how an overall management policy works. To think through maybe how we could use it to address needs in the plan with regards to eelgrass. Overall management policies trickle down to management unit policies. And that means that they, on a broad spectrum, can govern site-specific impacts and direct management policy or management unit policy development. They represent the highest, most broad level of local implementation measure under Goal 16. So here's what we are likely to see. We're likely to see some sort of revised Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan Part 2 to reflect amended language in Goal 16. So that's in Overall Implementation Policy 4 and Overall Implementation Policy 5. These changes would protect eelgrass generally. So comments should support the update. But what we need to ask ourselves is, do these policies, does this list of 5 policies protect eelgrass to the greatest extent allowed by Goal 16? Do we have to stick to this minimum floor, or could we go further? So let's look at Goal 16's underlying policy priority. Goal 16 broadly states that estuary plans and activities shall protect the estuarine ecosystem, including its natural biological activity, habitat diversity, unique features, and water quality. Based off of this text in Goal 16, we could argue that estuary management plans could go further to protect eelgrass under Goal 16. So the next thing we want to consider is what an effective overall management policy to protect eelgrass could look like. And how could we advocate for it? So CRAC or CREAC is a structure that a lot of us lawyers learn in law school. And in a modified way, it can be a really helpful way to think through how to present a comment on a proposed piece of rulemaking, like an estuary management plan. So you begin with your conclusion or your issue. In this case, it would be the overall management policies in the 1982 Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan do not go far enough to protect eelgrass. You would cite your rule or your supporting policy. In this case, that would be that text from Goal 16. And then you'd apply that rule or make an argument before you make a conclusion. So in this case, you would also want to state that you support the basic update of the overall management policies to reflect the law as it is right now with respect to dredge and fill and other alterations. And then you'd want to argue that the plan should go further. So this is specific language that I have suggested in the primer to protect eelgrass that is arguably consistent with Goal 16. First, I'd begin with an eelgrass protection policy, and I highly recommend folks that are interested in protecting eelgrass share this with decision makers. So, given eelgrass's importance to estuarian productivity, cultural lifeways, regional economies, and climate resilience, the overall management of estuaries in Lincoln County will be to ensure enhanced management and protection of eelgrass beds, as well as areas suitable for these habitats in the future. And then this is my wish list policy: an avoidance of impacts required, an overall management policy that suggests that adverse impacts to eelgrass and its suitable habitat, demonstrated by that maximum observed extent data, should be avoided. Again, it is not explicitly required by Goal 16, but it is consistent with Goal 16. And it's something that communities can push for because eelgrass is a vital resource and will support communities for years to come if we do what we can to protect it now. So that's what I have for you all today. Thank you all for coming. This image here is kind of an aspirational image. It's a sea otter peeking out from a clump of eelgrass. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with the work of the Alaka Alliance and what they're doing, but there has been research recently that suggests that sea otters can support healthy eelgrass beds. So that's a separate avenue that folks interested in protecting eelgrass can work through to bring about healthy eelgrass habitats, the reintroduction of otters. Yeah, I'll stop there and yeah, let's open it up to questions.
While waiting for someone else, Anu, I will plug in here. Would you talk a little bit about how the Yaquina Bay EMP process that you discussed is likely to relate to other processes? For instance, another one is going to get started in Coos Bay. How similar are they? How different are they likely to be?
Yeah, so I think they'd be similar here. And let me stop my screen share. Just so. See if I can. Well, hopefully that shouldn't be. So they will be similar likely in the materials they are updating, right? Each estuary management plan for a major estuary up and down the Oregon coast, again, includes maps, they include inventories, they include a mixture of at least, well, development estuaries will have all three of the management units, but a certain set of management units. So you will see updates based on you will see updates to each of those different components. Again, based on current conditions and based on current legal frameworks. I think that where an estuary like Coos Bay specifically can differ, one obvious way is that each community has its own set of needs, political considerations, and I guess coordination structures, right? In this case, we do have actually, interestingly, 2 counties that are coordinating with 2 cities, meaning up in Lincoln County and Coos County, to update plans. But yeah, I guess they will vary in complexity based on the complexity and size of the estuary. So what that has meant in Coos Bay is a lot of stops and starts in the process. The Coos Bay Estuary Management Plan update is technically ongoing. It started in 2018, I believe. And it hasn't gone along at the same clip as the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan has gone. But yeah, I think the difference primarily, Philip, is in the complexity of updating, or I guess the size and the complexity of uses in the estuary makes estuary management plans harder to update, if that makes sense. Does that address the question?
Sure.
But it's still the same basic framework. We're still looking at updating inventories. We're still looking at updating policies, and we're still looking at addressing climate change and approaching all of this through an equity lens and ensuring that tribes are consulted. That should not change, regardless of what estuary we're looking at.
We've got a question in the chat from Paul Engelmeyer asking, have you found a historical eelgrass distribution map?
Yes, that will be in the guide. We were actually trying to see if I could demonstrate that on a screen share, but the Pacific Marine Estuarian Partnership, which is doing great work on eelgrass extent and eelgrass restoration, has published a whole set of West Coast estuary and eelgrass data products. And one of those is maximum observed eelgrass extent. And it is available, I believe, for all major Oregon estuaries. And what it has done, or what they've done in this data set, and it's they have available GIS map viewers for you to view the data, because I am not a GIS expert, so I definitely like to have a web viewer for it. These data sets, which are current through 2018, have compiled all of available current and historic data sets and aggregated them on one map. And you can click through the map to see which data came from what year. So it's well labeled. You can see the extent. And when you're suggesting updates to management units, designations in particular, that's a way for you to tell planners and decision makers, hey, like we need to understand a significant eelgrass tract is more than just what is currently observed at this moment, right? We need to be considering major tracts as areas where eelgrass can migrate landward as the sea level rises. Or frankly, I mean, it's just such a delicate plant. Sometimes it just disappears and turns up like 2 years later. So we need to be careful not to destroy habitat where it could live, right?
Not seeing any other questions. I want to jump in with one other of my own, which is, you mentioned briefly, equity issues. The plans as they were done 40 years ago did not really address that at all, right? And particularly the tribes on the coast, the tribal governments, should have a role, right? But are not actually included in the current plans at all. So could you talk a little bit how they should be included?
Yeah, so the tribes on the Oregon coast, and I mean, the tribes are the stewards of our estuaries from, you know, time immemorial. Those are lands that tribes, and not to say our estuaries, those lands are estuaries in particular, are lands that Oregon's or tribes in Oregon have had kinship with for millennia. And for a number of reasons, but in particular with the Confederated Tribes of the Select Indians, with the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plans, their tribal, their federal recognition had been terminated and had not been restored at the time of adoption of the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan. And that means that the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan does not honor that sovereign tribal nation's stewardship duties in the bay. And just simply put, that's environmental injustice. It's a violation of several obligations. So one thing that is heartening in this process, and Philip, I think that you can maybe speak to this a little more, is that we have seen that state agencies have made an effort to reach out to ensure that representatives from the Confederated Tribes, the Select Indians, are on the steering committee for the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan. I think it remains to be seen whether that input, that engagement from this sovereign tribe is meaningfully honored and incorporated. And I think that's something that everyone on this call can advocate for. Keep asking. If you're presented with a slate of options, ask explicitly whether the tribes have been consulted on it, whether tribal concerns have been addressed. And that's not to say that, you know, any of us are entitled to know what those things are or where, you know, resources are. It's just to say that it's an important place where all of us need to show alignment if these new plans are going to do better than the old plans in terms of environmental justice and equity.
Yes, indeed. Both in terms of what we have to do in terms of formal consultation, and also in terms of taking advantage of the what's called traditional environmental knowledge, TEK, the insights that people who have been on the land for well, generations, but millennia really, but have generations of memory to actually inform us about, for instance, where eelgrass was formerly found. So yeah,
sure. And you know, something that's important to do for everyone is to, you know, learn more about what the tribe's stewardship obligations and responsibilities are and missions are when it comes to the Yaquina Bay Estuary. I know that the tribe has been working with several coalition partners on the restoration of native Olympia oysters in Yaquina Bay in particular. That's a forced food. And we know that those little oysters and eelgrass have a very good relationship. They kind of need each other to survive. Actually, that's one question I have for Jim the next time he does a presentation. Maybe whether the disappearance of those oysters has impacted eelgrass in Oregon's bays, but it's neither here nor there. So, I mean, the Confederated Tribes of the Select Indians down in Coos Bay, the Citi-Clusie Confederated Tribes, the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Tuuslaw Indians, they already have natural resource departments that are doing great work. Like Philip said, it's important to make sure that that work is, that we're understanding that work, understanding where kind of goals and objectives are aligned, and working alongside tribes to ensure that those goals and objectives are honored.
Okay, well, seeing no more questions, we can wrap this up, but I wanted to ask Anu, are you able to get that Jim Caldy reference into the chat quickly? So
yeah, that was
we'll stall here for a bit while you try to
I saw Paul in the chat. I think Paul might have been at that. Paul Engelmeyer, I think I'd seen you at that presentation. Yeah, that was a great presentation. And he said, If I can open the chat here.
But while Anu is attempting to do that, oh wait, here we go. Good, thank you.
There, I've shared it with everybody.
So I'll just say thanks to all of you for coming, and many thanks to Anu, not only for this presentation, but for 4 years of extremely dedicated work to help protect the coast. This is less like losing a lawyer and more like losing a member of the family. We will very much miss her, but well, she'll be with us a few more weeks. But meanwhile, the work to protect eelgrass specifically and estuaries in general goes on. If you have an interest in estuaries, but especially if you're interested in helping to protect Yaquina Bay, but also Coos Bay, where the estuary management plan process is about to get underway, get in touch with me. I'm again Philip Johnson. My email is Philip with 2 L's at oregonshores.org. We're just beginning to develop what we hope will be a deep bench of community activists who will help us push for maximum eelgrass protection and estuary protection in these processes. And with that, and thanks to Katie Russell, by the way, for being behind the scenes and taking care of us. And again, thanks to all of you. Have a good night. Bye.
Thank you all.